Thanks for having me today. And yeah, I'm really pleased to be here online to discuss my recent work. Sorry, just getting my slides up. Whoops. Can you see that okay? Yes, great. Great. So yes, thanks very much for having me. So I'm going to be talking about this broad question of how does music shape everyday inner experience, which is essentially because I didn't want to choose between the three topics that I wanted to talk about. I'm going to talk about three different topics that are all related in some way, which is this general idea of that, when we listen to music, it shapes a lot of other aspects of our inner mental experience, right? So when we listen to music, we're not just solely focused on the music. A lot of times we have music bringing back personal memories or what we call autobiographical memories from our lives, right? So this is the first subtopic that I'm going to talk about. So I'll talk about a 3-year project that I led a few years back on the experience of music-evoked autobiographical memories. Then tying in to a more ongoing topic in my lab, which is how music shapes our ongoing train of thoughts more broadly. So music doesn't just evoke personal memories from our lives, right, of real events. It also brings to mind lots of other thoughts, mental images, stories, and narratives, and so on. So I'm going to kind of probe into some of the factors underpinning that experience as well. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit, very briefly at the end, about how the inner experience of music itself shapes our well-being. So the idea that, sometimes we have music going around in our minds, and this can be kind of the purposeful initiation of music. Sometimes we purposely think of music for various reasons. This can be a spontaneous initiation of music as earworms and other experiences like that. So yes, I'll try and tie all these three topics together at the end, but starting out with the experience of music-evoked autobiographical memories. So this is the experience when we're listening to a piece of music and it brings back personal memories from our past, including it can be specific events from our past, but it could also be more broad time periods or just memories of a particular person from our lives, places from our lives, and so on and so forth. So I've been working on this topic for a while now, and we've done a range of different studies using different methodologies to try and capture and harness this experience in different ways. So we've done, for instance, some diary studies where we track this experience in people's everyday lives. And we found in those studies that memes, so music-evoked autobiographical memories, what I'll call memes, are a relatively common experience. So everyone who participated in our diary studies had at least one of these experiences. And on average, people experienced memes about once a day across the samples as a whole. And I should say these are participants, adult participants across a wide age range, but in the US and the UK specifically, who participated in our research. We also found in my own research, as well as some other related research, again in diary studies, but also in survey and experiments, that we tend to see a prevalence of positive or mixed emotions being evoked by the experience of memes. So when people report an autobiographical memory evoked by music, we ask them to rate or describe aspects of what emotions are evoked. And we tend to see patterns like this across different methods and different studies. So often quite positive emotions like happiness and love and calmness and so on, or kind of more mixed emotions like nostalgia, perhaps not surprisingly, also coming up quite highly across different studies and different methodologies. We also find there's quite a high prevalence of associations with particular people from one's life, more so than, for instance, music being associated with particular places. So people tends to be a kind of common theme, music being associated with a significant other, a family member, etc. And we also find that memes are rated quite high in social content compared to other types of memories. In this case, this was a study comparing memories evoked by watching TV. Again, I looked across several different studies using different methods, and I identified some of the common thematic content. So from the memory descriptions, what are kind of common words that are coming up in these? And you see there's a lot of memories related to friends or significant others, school days, school dances, driving and going on road trips and things like this, right? So these are, again, patterns ascertained across large groups of people. This doesn't necessarily show you all the rich individual variation, which also occurs. And I will show you some individual examples in a little bit as well. So this idea of music bringing back a lot of memories from, for instance, say high school dances and things like this, also ties into the broader concept of what we know as the reminiscence bump. So we know from general research in psychology, not just on music-evoked memories, that people tend to disproportionately recall memories from the period between about ages 10 to 30 years. Compared to autobiographical memories from other lifetime periods. And this is found in response to lots of different cue types, not just music. And there's various kind of theoretical explanations that have been posited for this, ranging from the idea that there are just many personally significant events that occur during this life period, also in relation to the idea of cultural life scripts that we often tend to place a lot of importance on key periods of transition within this period and so on and so forth. And so you can see in various studies, so this is one that I led, but there's several other studies that have found this reminiscence bump for music-evoked memories as well. So basically music, in this particular study, music that was released around when people were 14 years old tends to be the most autobiographically salient for the people in this particular study. This was several hundred people actually in France in this particular group that we worked with. But again, you can see also that this is not an effect that's unique to music. So the bottom part of the graph shows a graph of word cued memories. So this is a method where you give people, say, a single word like apple or table and ask them to recall a memory from their life. And you can see there's a similar peak where even those kind of fairly mundane word cues are more likely to trigger memories from that period of the reminiscence bump. Okay, so I said also I wanted to show you just some examples from our data sets because I think it's nice to kind of see what real people have to say in these types of tasks. So I'm going to show you a few examples from one of our diary studies. So you'll see on the screen the description of the memory that people wrote in their diaries, and you'll hear the music playing that evoked these particular memories.
I wanna be with you everywhere.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you a really brief taste of the kind of range of memories that we get. And I included that last example there to really demonstrate the idea that today I'm going to talk a lot about the kind of positive aspects of music on our memory recall from our lives. But I want to really emphasize that, of course, there can be these experiences also where music becomes quite tightly coupled with traumatic experiences. And given the fact that, many people in the world today have been through quite difficult and even traumatic situations in their lives, I just want to kind of highlight that example to remind us that, music, of course, has many, many positive benefits for our mental health, but that, there can be these cases where, music is a salient cue for memories that are not necessarily particularly positive or things that we want to necessarily be remembering. So I just give that as a sort of sobering reminder here. Okay, so moving on now to this question that lots of people ask, and this is a question that is of sort of broad interest beyond kind of research contexts as well. This idea of music maybe being somehow special or unique as a cue for memories from our lives. And my answer to this question is, well, sort of. So across many different studies, there's been this idea that, does music evoke more memories or more frequently evoke memories than other types of cues in our everyday lives, whether that be kind of visual cues or other aesthetic stimuli or other sounds or words or so on. And the answer to that is not really. So yes, music can frequently bring back memories. Like I said, in our diary studies, we found around once a day that happened. But it doesn't necessarily cue more memories or more frequent memories than other everyday stimuli. So other studies comparing music against various visual cues, sound cues, word cues, and so on did not find that music simply evokes more memories than other cue types. So again, this is a kind of important sort of clarification in this area that I think is needed. However, just simply cueing a lot of memories is maybe not necessarily the most interesting or exciting thing in the first place. So another aspect that we often look at in this area is, does music cue kind of qualitatively different memories? Are there different sort of phenomenological characteristics or subjective qualities of these memories when they are evoked? So what we found in some of my research and some other research in this domain is that music has been, in some cases, been found to evoke autobiographical memories rated as more personally significant than various other cues, like, for instance, in our studies, TV cues, food cues, word prompts in the work of Mohammed Al-Hajj and colleagues, and so on. But what I mean by personally significant is often we ask our participants to rate sort of how central that memory is to their life story. Is it a kind of key part of, if you had to narrate, what are the most important aspects of your life story? And this does seem to be one factor that is quite a salient factor that comes up across various studies. Another aspect is the sort of emotionality of the memories. So again, we often ask participants to rate or describe the kind of emotional impact of the memories. And we have found in a few different studies also that music seems to evoke, for instance, more positive memories from our lives than various other types of cues. So to give one example, we did a study where we ran 4 different experiments using pieces of music that conveyed a wide range of different emotions. So music that sounded, for instance, happy or calm or sad or angry, and compared music against other types of cues, so sounds in 2 experiments and words in 2 experiments that also conveyed those same emotions. And what we found is that across all of the experiments, so this is a graph from the first experiment, but we replicate this across all 4, that music evoked more consistently positive memories, regardless of whether the music itself sounded quite positive, like happy music, or quite negative, if it was sad or angry music, for instance. It still evoked quite positive memories for people. Whereas for the other cue types, the positive cues did evoke quite positive memories, but the negative sounds and words evoked more negatively rated memories. So there seems to be something interesting about music that, regardless of its own emotional connotation, it seems to be bringing back these fairly positive memories from our lives. We find a similar finding in a lab-based study. So this is an experiment where we actually ask people to form new episodic memories. So we play them either a piece of music or a sound that has a video playing at the same time. So these are videos of everyday scenes where, say, someone is kind of walking through a building and there's various rooms that they see and so on. After they kind of learn, so they encode these 14 scenes. And afterwards, they have a surprise memory test where they just then hear, for instance, a piece of music and say, what was the scene? Where we ask them, what was the scene that was coupled to this piece of music? And they have to describe in a free recall task, okay, this is the one where they were walking through the building and they did this and this and this. And so what we found there is that music, again, it didn't evoke more memories and it didn't evoke memories that were recalled more accurately in terms of the details. But music did seem to differentially impact the emotions of the memories. So the scenes that were recalled in response to music cues were rated as more positive in valence and less arousing, so more relaxing, essentially, which is quite striking because the music and the sounds were actually were coupled with the exact same everyday video scenes. So the scenes themselves did not change, but something about recalling them in response to music versus in response to sounds made people evaluate them differently in their emotional properties. So to conclude this kind of part of the talk, the kind of if we think about the implications for everyday mental health and well-being, for instance, so music does appear to be a particularly salient cue for positive and personally significant lifetime memories, at least in the populations we've worked with, which are generally everyday adults across a wide age range in the UK and the US. And we also find that music cues may potentially lead to sort of more positive reappraisal of memories upon recall, which also relates to another actually recent study, an fMRI study, in which so Uren Ren and colleagues found that so they also did an encoding task where people had to kind of learn new episodic memories, and then when they sort of recalled them when they were listening to positive music, the positive music actually made them recall them in a more positive way, and actually they added in sort of more positive details at a later stage as well, recalling them a subsequent day. So there's some interesting things going on here that I think are worth kind of thinking about in terms of, the relationship between music, memory, and everyday sort of well-being and mental health. So transitioning now to our ongoing research in my lab about thoughts during music listening. So as I mentioned, when we listen to music, of course, we don't just recall real memories from our lives. We often experience quite a wide range of other mental images, imagined stories, and so on and so forth. So in my ongoing project, which is a Leverhulme Trust funded project, we are interested in sort of this question of why do some music listening experiences evoke different types of thoughts? Why does sometimes you're listening to a piece of music and you kind of just imagine some abstract colors floating around. Other times you might imagine a really kind of detailed fictional story. And the other question we're interested in is what factors impact the content of our thoughts during music listening. So again, why does sometimes, we might imagine a story about a king in a castle when listening to music, and other times a sort of chase scene and so on, right? Lisa Margulis and I, so Lisa Margulis is the co-investigator on this project, and we've put together a sort of initial sort of theoretical proposal about how some of these things work in a recent article. And so, when you listen to a piece of music, of course, you have many kind of existing associations that shape sort of how you think about that music. You have some semantic associations around, this music kind of reminds me of a concept like royalty. You might have episodic or contextual associations, like this music reminds me of the last time I was at a castle, and various emotional associations like love, for instance. And of course, these things are all, not just shaped by the music, but to have these associations in the first place, we have a lot of individual factors at play related to the cultural background of the listener, their expertise, various other individual differences. And of course, the interesting thing about music here as well is that music unfolds over time. So these associations might remain stable in this case, or they might change as the music continues to unfold and so on. And so these things then continue to shape our ongoing narrative that we might imagine during the piece of music. So thinking about firstly this question of the factors that shape the type of thoughts we have during music listening. So what types of thoughts emerge? We have a paper from my lab that came out last year, which is called Thoughtscapes in Music, and we looked at the different types of thoughts that emerge in response to 356 pieces of music or excerpts of music from 17 different genres of music. So these are a wide range of genres, ranging from sort of art music genres to music composed for media to more popular music genres. And we found that various factors are at play here. So we found, firstly, there was various effects of genre. So the film music that we used was very good at cueing these kind of imaginative scenes like fictional stories and memories of media itself. I should say also that the music, about half of the music we used was selected to be fairly familiar and about half selected to be fairly unfamiliar. But interestingly, even the kind of quite unfamiliar film music was still evoking a lot of sort of film-like scenes, even if people didn't know the specific film it was from. Classical music also was particularly good at evoking fictional stories. We also found that ratings of familiarity of the music played a role. So music rated as more familiar evoked more memories, more music-related thoughts. So thoughts, kind of evaluative thoughts about the music, for instance, and abstract imagery as well. Enjoyment of the music by the listeners seemed to be related to what we call these more kind of complex narratives, so fictional stories and autobiographical memories, but less of this kind of more abstract imagery and less mind wandering. So we asked people if they were just having thoughts about everyday stuff, like what they wanted for lunch and things like that, right? Musical contrast of the music itself was also a significant predictor in terms of music that was less contrasting over time. So rated as less, changing less over time, evoked more of these mind-wandering thoughts. So people start to think about what they want for lunch instead of imagining kind of vivid scenes and narratives, for instance. So these are just a few of the various factors that we looked at in this paper, but this starts to give you a kind of a picture of trying to unpack some of the features of the music itself, but also features of the individual listener that shape the types of thoughts that are emerging. So more recently, we've been looking more at the kind of content of the thoughts. So people actually describing the thoughts that emerge during listening to music. And I've just put some of the raw data on this slide here just to give you some examples. So the different colored texts are different participants. So each color is one participant. And we had asked participants essentially to just describe any thoughts they had while listening to this excerpt of music. So I'll play this for you here. You can probably maybe even imagine what the music is going to sound like before you hear it. Okay, so I'll stop that there. And I should say that the excerpts we used were 30-second long excerpts of music. But interestingly, you can see, quite a lot of similarity across different people in the thoughts and stories they were imagining in response to this music. Over that one for the sake of time. So in this particular experiment, we used 120 different excerpts of music, that one just being one of the examples, across 10 different genres of music. And the main task was just giving these open-ended descriptions of the thoughts and scenes that they imagined during the music. We asked them to make various ratings about those thoughts as well afterwards. So I'm going to focus on these open-ended thought descriptions. So what we did with these texts is we then wanted to kind of create a sort of quantification of essentially how similar these texts were to each other. So there's various pre-processing that is involved. So we have to spell check and lemmatize, so words like dancing converted to dance and so on, and remove various English stop words like I and A. So we compile what we call thought docs, which is all of the responses from all the listeners to a particular excerpt of music. And we project these into what we call a word embedding space. So this is a sort of 200-dimensional space that maps where the thoughts sit in semantic space in relation to one another and in relation to a corpus. In this case, this is a Google corpus called Word2Vec. And what we can do then, once we kind of project all these thought docs, we can actually quantify how close these two documents fall within this space. So this is measured via cosine similarity values. And what we can do from this, then we can have essentially a quantitative estimate of where, how related each of the thought docs are, and look at how that relates to various other aspects of the music. So in this case, so you can see on the left our dependent variable, which is the semantic similarity of these thought docs. So how similar the thoughts are to different excerpts of music in a matrix there. And you can then see that we use various other factors to predict how similar the thoughts were. So what we found is essentially that all of these predictors were significant predictors, and we explain about half of the variance in the model here. So if two excerpts of music were from the same genre, they were evoking more similar thoughts. If they had more similarity in terms of their timbral features, so we extracted various auditory features using Labrosa, this also played a role in driving more similar thoughts. If they were rated more similar in the emotions conveyed by the music, and this was done by a separate set of participants, this also drove similarity of thoughts. And also the contextual associations people had for this music. So again, this was a separate sample of people who were asked to just describe, in response to these excerpts, what kind of context do you think you would most likely hear this music in? So you can see that, again, there's a combination of factors at play here, some more related to the kind of perceptual properties of the music, some related to these kind of pre-existing associations we have with, this is music that should be played in a bar or should be played in a video game or so on and so forth. Interestingly, actually, the contextual association descriptions were the most significant predictor of the thought doc similarity. These actually played the biggest role compared to the kind of lower level perceptual features. So another way that we can look at this particular data is we can also look at what are the kind of key topics that emerge in these thought descriptions. So not just looking at the similarity between different thought documents, but what are the kind of main themes that come up in these texts? So we again use an automated modeling approach here called LDA, topic modeling, so latent Dirichlet allocation. And what we can do, so this is essentially a way of sort of clustering the data into sort of related themes in an automated way. And within this particular data set, we found there were 16 emerging topics. So I'll give you some examples here. So for instance, topic 7, we gave the names to them that you see at the top. So we called topic 7 the urban topic. It has words like city, street, walk, man, as kind of key words that are emerging in the thoughts that fall under that topic. And then you can also then look at which particular piece of music is most associated with that topic. So the highest score on this topic is this piece of music. Whoops, I've lost my mouse. There we go. And then if we give one more example, topic 8, suspense. The highest scoring piece of music on this topic is this one. Okay, so what we can do with this data now, so essentially for each of the pieces of music, our 120 excerpts of music, we now have a score on how well it fits within each of these 16 topics. And then we can model, how well various aspects of the music predict their score on each of those 16 topics. So what we did here is we extracted auditory features of the music covering 7 different domains and looked at how each of those auditory features explained variance in those 16 topics. And we found that, so for all of the 16 topics, auditory features explained a statistically significant amount of variance, but the amount of variance explained varied across topics. So some topics, like tranquil waters and dance party, are fairly well explained just by auditory features of the music. So we can predict fairly well whether that particular topic is going to emerge simply by knowing what the music sounds like. But other topics like road trip and lullaby were sort of less well explained by these features. So this sort of makes sense that, essentially sometimes we have thoughts that are more driven by sort of perceptual features of the music, and other times maybe more driven by things that aren't kind of as well captured by just looking at, what's the timbre and the tempo and the dynamics of the music, for instance. We also found that adding emotion ratings into these models, so the ratings of valence and arousal of the music, they do also explain additional variance, but often to a limited degree. Actually, the audio features already capture quite a lot of the variance in these topics. The other thing we can do, which is quite cool, is we can, so we had those 7 different domains of audio features. And we can do what's called commonality analysis. So look at the kind of unique contribution of each of those 7 domains to explaining each of the 16 topics. So I'll zoom in on some of those here. So you can kind of think of this as a sort of recipe of, for each of these topics, what are the different features that you kind of, that are most important to explaining these particular thoughts that people are having. So you can see that, for instance, if people are thinking about tranquil waters, a lot of that is being driven by the what we call our timbral richness features. But if people are thinking about transitions, these are more driven by things like dynamics and a little bit by timbre and rhythm, for instance. Okay, so the implications of research on this particular topic area, right? So basically, why are we doing this? So understanding why certain music evokes particular types of thoughts, like stories or abstract imagery, but also content. So peaceful river scene versus an intense chase is very important for, helping to inform both therapeutic and everyday kind of well-being uses, but also creative uses of music, right? So, and how we can also think about, how particular music might actually be used to sort of enhance creative thought in various ways as well. Of course, I also want to point out that cultural associations play a key role in shaping these experiences, right? So as I mentioned, the data that we've been collecting is primarily listeners based in the US and the UK. And I wouldn't say that, this sort of recipe that I showed you of these are the auditory features that predict this particular topic of thoughts would necessarily extend very well to a completely different population of music listeners. So I think, we have to be careful about, yes, we could, use these same methods to model that process in other populations, but I wouldn't assume that other populations of people are having the same types of thoughts in response to the same music, for instance. And we know this well from various cross-cultural studies in this area already. Okay, so the very final thing I want to talk about today is a very short just plug for another ongoing project that on which I'm the co-investigator. So Freya Bales is the principal investigator of this network grant that we have, which is on inner music and well-being. This is an ongoing project which will be going through the end of this calendar year. It's an interdisciplinary team that we've brought together, spanning across a lot of different disciplines, and also not just researchers, but practitioners and clinicians as well. If you want to learn more, the website is musicinmyhead.org. And what we're working on in this project, so inner music is a slightly different thing. So this is the inner experience of music itself. So the awareness of a mentally generated representation of musical sound. So when you're actually hearing music in your mind. Within this network, we define this quite broadly. So sometimes people imagine music quite purposely. Sometimes it just comes to mind spontaneously. There are various non-pathological and pathological instances of this. A non-pathological instance would be something like just an everyday earworm, but you can also have experiences of, for instance, musical hallucinations or musical obsessions, which is an experience that's often comorbid with OCD, for instance. And we know that inner music can impact our well-being for better or for worse from various existing research. So within this particular network, our aim is really to kind of bring together lots of different academics and practitioners from very different backgrounds to develop various joint research questions around these topics. And so to date, we've had various kind of online webinars, and we also had an international symposium in Durham about a month ago that I hosted. And some of the emerging interests and synergies. So I'm not going to talk about research outcomes, but just some of the ongoing projects and ideas that are emerging here. There's a real interest in considering how inner experiences of music play a role in everyday well-being, how we can use imagined music for emotion regulation and coping in everyday life. We also have several people actually interested in inner music and sleep as well, which relates back to Kira's talk as well, which we can speak about at the round table perhaps. We also have people with therapeutic interests or also interests in practical uses of inner music for mental and physical health needs. So for instance, there's a project where people are looking at how imagined music can be helpful for people with Parkinson's disease. So we know that listening to music can be really helpful in for instance, initiating and sustaining movement. But actually, if you don't have music playing, actually imagining music can also fill in that context and actually help people to get up out of their seat, get them moving at a stable pace, and so on and so forth. We've been bringing together research on clinical and non-clinical manifestations of inner music. So we've been working with clinicians who have an interest in musical hallucinations, tinnitus, and so on and so forth. We also have people really interested in specialist uses of inner music, for instance, by experts, and how these can be impacted by changes or absence of inner music. So we had a really interesting presentation at the symposium also about auditory aphantasia, which is the absence of inner music experience, and how that plays a role for the development of musicianship skills and so on. So there's various forthcoming things from this network to look out for. And like I said, you can check our website for more updates. So just to finally conclude by bringing together the various strands of what I've talked about today. So inner experience of music itself, or what we call musical imagery. is a common everyday occurrence that can impact emotional, intentional, and creative processes in various ways, and with various implications for everyday mental well-being and flourishing. Um, Music also evokes rich mental experiences besides just the inner experience of music itself. So it evokes many memories, imagery, and stories, and so on in listeners. It's often evocative of quite personally significant and positive lifetime memories. And although these experiences often feel quite idiosyncratic and quite ephemeral, we actually can capture these in a way that they can be scrutinized and at least partially explained in tractable ways, looking at both the features of the music and the listener experience, but also contextual associations in the context in which these occur. Okay, so just to conclude, thanks very much to everyone for listening, and looking forward to discussing more with you.